with lots to discuss. Um, and for our top news, securing decent living standards for all while reducing global energy use, it says we can do it, but it's a giant lift. Can we really do it? What about it? Then, in terms of the electric vehicles and so on, Canada is going to ban new gasoline and diesel car sales in 25. So it's the first country in this region to ban guzzlers, but it won't be the last. In materials and graphene, we now have the world's thinnest technology that's only 2 atoms thick. And Richard will tell us why that's important. And now, the next one, I don't know whether it's physics or whatever, but it's about reality. And it asks, is reality just a game of quantum mirrors? A new theory suggests that. What is real? Says Richard. What do you think? In the environment, reducing plastic waste will require fundamental change in culture. Is it possible? In biology, beyond coronavirus, we're getting to virus discoveries that are transforming all of biology. For us humans, there's a dragon man fossil, and it may place Neanderthals as its relative. That is, maybe our closest relative is from Asia, not Europe. And then, in terms of health, there's a simple blood test probably coming out very soon that can detect 50 types of cancer. It's accurate enough to be rolled out, says Richard. So, Richard, what's this in our top story that securing decent living standards for all while reducing global energy use? Is it true that we can do it? And if so, how?
Well, we can do it, but all it takes is fundamental changes in our economic system in the world. So it's easy, right? But it's still possible, say the scientists who studied it very carefully, to secure decent living standards for everybody on the planet while still operating in the right direction for this climate disaster that we have going on. Uh, they say all we need to do this is governments around the world need to drastically improve public services, reduce income disparity, and scale back on resource extraction. And this is big for places like the US, abandon economic growth in affluent countries. That's all we have to do. And then people around the world could thrive while cutting global energy average use in half. Now, without fundamental changes, we face an existential dilemma. In our current economic system, the energy savings required to avert catastrophe, and that may undermine living standards, while improvements in living standards required to end material poverty would need large increases in energy use, making a bad problem even worse. So that's what we have following the trajectories that we're on now. So this group, which was led by researchers at the University of Leeds in the UK, what they did is they tried to examine what policies could enable countries to use less energy while still providing the whole population with decent living standards. And the decent living standards, they uh, are conditions that satisfy fundamental human needs for food, water, sanitation, health, education, and livelihoods. Uh, the lead author, John Vogel, says decent living standards are crucial for human well being, and reducing global energy use is crucial for averting catastrophic climate change. Truly sustainable development would mean providing decent living standards for everyone, but with at much lower sustainable levels of energy. The current economic system, though, there is no country in the world that does this. That is zero. No one's even close. And uh, the analysts here say that our economic system is a big part of the problem, and that basically it is unfit for the challenges of the 21st century. And the problem is that our current economic system, all the countries that achieve decent living standards use much more energy than can be sustained. Now, to give you some numbers, they did some figuring, and by 2050, to meet the climate goal, global energy use needs to be as low as 27 gigajoules. A joule is a measure of energy that I never actually encountered until I was in the switch mode power supply business. And it's one way of measuring energy. So they said we would need to get to 27 gigajoules per person, but right now
Uh,
the global energy use is
and
more than twice that, and that needs to be cut in half around the world. And some places, like the US and Canada, need a 90% cut. So uh, it's a tough job to be able to do that, and those are profound changes. And the concern still is such cuts change the standard of living, but again, it's not inevitable. Research shows that fundamental changes in economic and social priorities could resolve the dilemma for sustainable development. Again, what they're talking about is improving public services, and this will enable countries to provide decent living standards at lower levels of energy use. And so government should offer free and high quality public service such as transportation, health, and education. They also say that they found a fairer income distribution is crucial for achieving these kind of living standards. And the problem is the way we live now, as the standard of life goes up, so does our energy consumption, and that is not sustainable. Now, perhaps the most crucial of the findings and surprising of the findings is that economic growth below moderate levels of affluence is detrimental for our hopes for sustainable development. In fact, economic growth in affluent or even moderately affluent countries is detrimental for living standards and fundamentally unsustainable. The problem is this economic growth is tied to increases in energy use, and thus to make the energy savings we need are almost impossible. So, in conclusion, they say we need to abandon economic growth in affluent countries, scale back resource extraction, and prioritize public services. Uh, and that achieving this ultimately requires a broader, more fundamental transformation in our growth dependent economic system. And the they say the most promising vision for this required transformation is the idea of degrowth. And they say that this degrowth is an idea whose time has come. I'm afraid that even by saying degrowth, YouTube will edit this whole video and not let us show it. So, what do you think?
I think it's very pessimistic because if you move economic growth to areas that benefit the environmental impact, you have inventions that actually helps the environment. So if the economic growth moves to those areas, you can have growth and also less uh, power need and others. So seems a little pessimistic to me.
Well, I would agree with you that it's pessimistic. You and I also, we both believe in the transforming power of technology, and we both seen it in our life. They're still saying this is a tough row to hoe. And if they're saying all that is needed is to have the well to do countries stop their growth based economies and try something else, I don't know about that. I've been talking about that since I was a teenager and haven't made any headway yet.
One of the things that you said was that what is necessary is that government should supply the energy, and it should be free. And of course, that's an impossibility. The government can supply the energy, all right, but only if they can collect enough revenues from taxes to sustain that.
They didn't say government should provide free energy. They
That's what you said.
they said government should, support transportation and health and education.
Well, anyway, I thought that it would be a good idea if government would be the only player in providing energy, because if you leave it to the individual companies competing, then you have many more players and control becomes very difficult.
Uh-huh.
The reality here is that these guys are naive if they believe that the Western countries are going to collapse their economies by enough to cut energy use by 50 to 90%. And
now they didn't say anybody was going to do it. They said they ran the numbers and this is what's required.
I know they're suggesting it's required, but the idea that anybody would accept this wrong, and distracting from the reality of what we have to face. We all accept that the climate is changing. It's changed in the past and it will change in the future. And right now it's getting a little bit warmer, and we should be focusing our energies and resources on adapting to these changes rather than trying to stop these changes. It's impossible to stop them. And it's also impossible to expect the third world to continue at their low standard of living. They're going to need to expend and consume more energy to improve their situation.
Are you suggesting that it's not carbon dioxide related? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but you do agree that carbon dioxide is the reason for the change in the climate?
No, that's not the reason at all. Carbon dioxide levels follow climate change rather than lead climate change.
But
And
the
we've
climate
seen this
change
so much.
happens because of the carbon dioxide levels. And if you look at the
But
reality of it, first the CO2 level goes up and then the climate changes.
no, that's not the way it happens. And when you look in the
How
historical
come why do
information,
you say that's not the way that happened? Please explain this to us then. The floor is yours.
Well,
You have 1 minute.
thank you. No, we all know that in the past there were warm periods that were far warmer than they are today when the carbon levels were low. And similarly, there were cold periods when the carbon levels were orders of magnitude higher than they are now at the CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And it's like in the medieval warm period, Greenland was a green land and it was populated. And then the climate turned cold and they were run out of business. And the same thing is going to happen here again.
Can I just comment that the change in the climate over the last 200 years, coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, on the grand curve of climate, this change is a complete anomaly from what you're talking about. The changes you're referring to are over the course of millions of years. We've watched a change occur over like a second in the grand scheme of 5 billion years. So and so you're basically taking an alternative position from 99% of all of the climatologists on planet Earth.
That's
so
not,
I don't know where.
That's not correct.
I mean, it's quite a position.
That's not correct. Even looking just at the last 1,000 years, the medieval warm period lasted about 400 years, from 900 AD to 1300 AD. And then the climate changed relatively quickly and became much colder. And similarly, there was another cold, the Little Ice Age in the 1700s. The climate can change in decades rather than in millennia or in millions of years.
Anyway, the last time we saw this level of carbon, they know that fairly well, and it was over 4 million years ago. So what we're going through now is extraordinary and happening at an extraordinary range. And I think the CO2 connection is positive. That is the source of the trouble. One of the pieces of evidence we have for this is Venus, with its high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere and its temperatures too high for life as we know it.
Yeah, CO2 is a side issue here.
Anyway, thank you for your opinion. That doesn't agree with anything that I read, but you may be the only guy who's in the room that's right.
Well, I'm not trying to change your mind.
Anyway, let's move on, please. About moving on now to the next story. I'm not sure where Fred is. I don't see Fred. Fred dropped out. That's why we don't hear him. Anyway, now Canada is saying that they will ban new gasoline and diesel car sales in 2035. And they are the only country on this side of either pond that are doing this. What they're trying to do, they say, is have standards that are equal to or better than any of the other places in the region. And maybe they are being driven by California, not the USA. California also is instituted a similar ban, and in the world, the UK and Japan have also done it. Now, the Canadian ban would also outlaw hybrids and plug-in hybrid, so it's fairly serious. And now there are many places in the world and automobile companies that are all saying they're going to end production and the ability to purchase gas engine cars around 2035. So for most of us, that means change is in our future. It's not too soon, but it's going to be coming. So just don't get stuck with a gas guzzler. So, any comments?
Well, I think that it should be done much sooner, really. When they're talking about new cars, because there'll be still an awful lot of cars that were already there that will operate for quite a while. Like, I'm driving a Honda that's 22 years old, and it's still going fine. And I wasn't planning on buying any cars, so if I'm just an example, So I don't know what the percentages of new cars to used cars, but I have a feeling that will remain quite large.
They say typically cars turn over after about 10 years of use. So the car on average has about a decades of use. So if they ban them in 2035, then it'll be 2045 before they all get on the road. One of the things that's going to happen after the ban is gas prices, I would bet, go up because the gas volumes go down and the companies have to make their money somehow.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, if they increase the cost of gasoline, put more taxes on the gasoline, that would discourage people from buying these gas guzzlers.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Certainly, there are lots of things that governments can do to help the transitions, and there are still some places in the world that are giving people subsidies to buy electric vehicles.
Europe does that. Much cheaper to register an electric vehicle than a gasoline vehicle.
Uh-huh. They also say that by 2 or 3 years from now, the purchase price on these EVs is going to continue to go down as the battery costs continue to go down, and soon the EV will have a equivalent purchase price of the gas guzzler. And when that happens, it's going to take off because their operating costs are so much lower.
Yeah.
The one reason the electric vehicle operating costs are lower is because electricity isn't taxed the same way that the gasoline is.
Sure, you're certainly right.
And when electric vehicles have to pay their fair share of highway costs and so on, then they will be taxed accordingly, and there will be.
Well, Richard, I think I'm back. Is that right?
You're back. You're back.
Welcome.
We have no internet here, so I tried to see if I could use my phone for a hotspot, and it seemed to work.
Okay.
And so where are we at?
We're
talking
moving,
about-
getting ready to move to
Materials.
graphene.
Aha. So what's about this being fat and sick? So what?
Well, researchers at Tel Aviv University have engineered what is presently the world's tiniest technology with a thickness of only 2 atoms. And this is going to be used, they believe, as a way of storing information in the thinnest and smallest way that they have figured out now how to do it. Right now, the current state of the art requires crystals that are about 1 million atoms, and that's 100 atoms in height, width, and thickness. This new technology is going to be 2 atoms thick, so it's at least going to be 50 times smaller than the existing technology. I'm not sure about the length and width dimension because it still takes a crystalline structure around it to make this happen. And when this is able to be used, then not only is it going to decrease the thickness of the device, but it turns out that this makes it both faster and reduces the energy use. So this is going to be a significant step forward in the technology. And for technical reasons that are hard for me to explain, they're going to call this slidetronics, and they're calling it that because underneath it there is some polarization stage that when you hit it with electricity, it slides over and changes polarity. And this effect seems to be a long-term effect. It's stable even when the electric field is shut down, so it will be able to retain memory like the current disk drives. And so this is a significant step towards the continuing reduction in size, increase in speed, and improvement of efficiency in the core systems that make our electronics technology possible.
Any thoughts?
Well, I wonder what
Yeah.
it would look like. It's two atoms thickness. Is that even visible?
I don't know if you can see through it. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Well, that's the question. I mean, it's so
I don't
thin.
know.
And the
And
thing
then the other thing is, I assume that it will probably be much larger than the current, storage capacities of, let's say, a cell phone. It's used within a cell phone. So if you were to fold the stuff, might there not be bleed over?
Well, I think it'll make electronics small enough so that on your cell phone you can have a supercomputer.
Yeah,
Hard to understand it.
it won't result in a 50 factor of 50 reduction in size because a big fraction of the chip is the insulating material and all the connecting stuff between the actual on-off decision-making components of the chip. But it will make it smaller. Richard, do you know how much of the chip is kind of insulation and connective tissue between
No,
the...
so far I haven't seen anything, and so far they're are not talking about chip designs. They're talking essentially about the design of a switch.
But on an existing existing chip, how much of it is the switch and how
Well,
much is all the other stuff?
I don't know the ratios.
Oh.
Google may have to answer for that.
Could you
I should-
put that in practical terms of what that actually means and when we could see this? And just like for the average Joe, what does this actually mean?
For the average Joe, we're not going to see stuff like this for the top 5 to 10 years.
But then
What
in 10 years, what will we see? What will happen?
well, what you will see, for example, will be a smartphone that you won't need to type anything into. It's going to have great voice recognition, and you can just use your voice to speak to it. It probably, your smartphone by then will also be able to read, have enough intelligence in it to be able to read your emotional state and then be able to respond best to you based on how you're feeling at the moment.
So let me translate. My phone will now be my psychotherapist. Sweet. Okay.
That's right. And your friend.
And my friend, even better.
That's right. And it'll remember your name and everything.
Will it
Now,
vacuum my great room?
No.
Okay. The hell with it.
Rich, when you're talking in these terms, it makes me wonder what is real, which is the aspect of the next thing. Is reality just about a mirror game?
Well,
what's all this about?
Well, it's a good question. What is reality? And right now, the way we think about it, if you imagine sitting down and picking up your favorite book, to you, the book is made of a range of sensory appearances. And these sensory appearances, of course, you send to your mind, and it translates all those signals and creates an image of the book in the mind. And because when you put the book down and you go back, it's still in the same place, you expect the book to have its own independent existence. But expecting objects to have their own independent existence, independent of us and any other object, is actually a pretty deep-seated assumption that we make around the world. And this kind of assumption has been the heart of our scientific advancements for the last several hundred years. Now, there is an Italian physicist, Carlo Rovelli, and he argues in his new book, Helgoland, that he talks about quantum theory. And he says quantum theory, the physical theory that describes the universe at the smallest scales, almost certainly shows that worldview is false. Instead, he argues that we should adapt a relational worldview. Now, some of our intellectual history during the scientific revolution, Isaac Newton and his German counterpart Leibniz disagreed on the nature of space and time. Newton claimed space and time acted as a container for the contents of the universe, so that if we could remove the contents of the universe, then we would be left with empty space and time. This is the absolute view of space and time. Leibniz, on the other hand, claimed that space and time were nothing more than the sum total of distances and durations between all the objects and events in the world. And if we remove the contents of the universe, we would remove space and time also. It was this fairly radical relational view of space and time, by the way, that was the key inspiration for Einstein's theory of general relativity. So some of the thinkers have kind of lined up with this. And Ravelli makes use of this idea to understand quantum mechanics. And he says that the objects of quantum theory, like the photon, electron, and other fundamental particles, are nothing but the properties they exhibit when interacting with, when they're in relation to other objects. And these properties, he says, that are just a function of their relationship to other objects include things like the object's position, momentum, and energy. So the things that make up the object's states. And according to Ravelli's relational view, these properties are all there is to the object. Without these properties, there is no objects. He goes on and talks about the well-known quantum puzzle of Schrodinger's cat. We put a cat in a box with some lethal agent, like a vial of poison gas, triggered to a quantum project which is basically random, like the decay of an atom, and then we close the lid. And the present view is this quantum process is a chance event, and there's no way to predict what will happen. Certainly there'll come a time when the decay will trigger the vial and the poison gas and kills the cat. And so the physicists say now that the life or death of the cat is a purely chance event. And according to current quantum theory, the cat is neither dead nor alive until we open the box and see. So a puzzle remains, of course, considering what it would be like for the cat. Now, according to the relational interpretation, the state of a system is always in relation to some other system, so the quantum process in the box might have an indefinite outcome, dead or alive, we don't know, but have a definite outcome for the cat. The cat was always either dead or alive. We just didn't know until we opened the box. So under this view, is perfectly reasonable for the cat to be neither dead or alive for us, but definitely dead or alive for the cat. So in this relational interpretation, there is no global God's eye view of reality. Reality depends on its relationship with the stuff around us. And this is like the Buddhist idea of dependent origination. The Buddhists would say basically that nothing exists on its own. It all exists in relation to everything else. So it's possible that the Buddhists had an idea that is very compatible with this guy's idea of relational existence. And as Ravelli puts it, quote, "We are nothing but images of images. Reality, including ourselves, is nothing but a thin and fragile veil beyond which there is nothing."
So what do you think?
And do you exist to think? God.
I'm
I
afraid I've
think
got
that
something to say there. The problem here is that the word reality is misused. It should be perception. And reality refers to realness or things that are real. And this guy's talking about relationships and ideas that are ephemeral and perceptions that are created in individuals' brains. So he needs a different word for the reality that we create in our own minds. It's not a reality.
Here he's not talking about the mental conceptual reality. He's talking about the existence, for example, of an electron.
Well, the
That
electron
the
exists.
electron exists in his way of thinking because of all of the other effects of all of the other stuff that's around it. And when these effects accumulate in a particular way, it comes out looking like an electron. Certainly, that's what quantum theory says. And he's coming at this from the point of view of quantum theory. And he's suggesting that since quantum theory suggests the most basic level of reality, and that we should figure out how to use these ideas in outside of quantum physics.
Can I give my own Buddhist
Sure.
perspective on this? I'll try to make this Buddhist story short, but one Buddhist story I heard was that a wounded soldier was in the field having been shot by a poisoned arrow, and he's being attended to by a doctor back 2,000 years ago. And the guy says, well, what kind of wood did they use for the arrow? And he goes, I don't know. And he says, what kind of poison? I don't know. What kind of feather? I don't know. And I'm trying to make this short, but at the end he goes, look, if I keep answering all your freaking questions, you're going to be dead. So my sense of Buddha was, I don't know what the fuck about these questions, but I do know why you're unhappy. And here's my prescription for being happy. So my response to all that is, it has no basis in everyday life. And it sounds like mental masturbation. I'm sorry, to me. I just think it has no relevance in our lives, what you're talking about. It does have relevance, it must, in quantum physics. But to apply that to our everyday existence just seems like it doesn't add up to me. I don't know. What does everybody else think about that?
Richard was in a way, this is related to experiment they made with two atomic clocks, one on Earth and one in a satellite flying very, very fast. And they determined that the two clocks, there is a measurable difference. That would be related to Einstein's theory, wouldn't it?
Hello?
oh, we're all waiting.
Richard,
Well, we're not solving the problem of reality right here today.
So if we want,
Let's go
if
on.
we don't want to, if we can't do that, how about the fact that we can't reduce plastic waste unless we have a fundamental change in culture? What's that?
Now, one of the reasons why this story attracted me was that I think the other crisis that is going on in our time is the crisis of plastic waste that just keeps accumulating in our environment. And here, some scientists at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability and Studies, which I believe is in Germany, then looked at consumers in Germany about their use of plastic packages. And they were trying to look at human attitudes to see if that could give them any insight into the problem. And they found that the vast majority, 96% of the German population, consider it important to reduce packaging waste. And yet, even with that uh, strong viewpoint in Germany, since 1997, in about the last 20 years, the amount of plastic packaging per capita has doubled. So they have the attitude that plastic packaging is bad, but plastic packaging is still going up. So this group did a uh, survey of people trying to understand what was going on, and they identified about a dozen barriers to reducing plastic packaging. And the first is people's habits. People mostly shop at supermarkets or discounters, and most people do not take their own packaging with them, bags or containers, when they go grocery shopping. Also, processed and packaged foods are popular, and those all have packaging. So the first is habits. The second is lack of knowledge. Consumers don't know which kind of packaging is best for the environment. The third thing they found out was concerns about hygiene. Uh, People don't know about the hygienic properties of freely accessible displays of unpackaged goods like fruit, for example. And they also don't know about the use of how hygienic self-brought packaging would be, and so they have concerns about hygiene. Another is just material project. Plastic packaging is lightweight and shatterproof and tear resistant, and people like that. They also, uh, there are issues of priorities. Uh, Participants described how their effort to use less plastic packaging clash with other things they need to do in their daily life. One example was you don't want to uh, send your kid to school with a heavy backpack, so they tend to use plastic instead of glass bottles for the drinks with them. Uh, there's another issue about price. Generally, groceries packaged in plastic are more affordable. There's also a big issue, I think, of availability, and that is most groceries offered in supermarkets and discounters are only available in plastic. There's an issue of diffusion of responsibility. Industry is responsible for the packaging of the products, and they are not providing alternatives to the existing products that are packaged in plastic. And they feel like industry has to offer solutions, but they also emphasize that consumers should shop more consciously and avoid products in plastic packaging. There also is an issue of infrastructure, uh, zero waste packaging shops and weekly markets and things like that that use alternative packages are difficult to reach and require more time. Time is an issue, and it's one of the barriers for many things on plastic-free shopping. There are concerns that shopping would take longer. If you have to package all the stuff in the bags yourself, it would take longer. And then you have to spend time cleaning your containers. And also, preparing unprocessed food stuff instead of buying the processed food takes more time. Uh, Convenience, people think it's inconvenient to take their own containers. And there's still this consumer culture that we have, which is a culture of spontaneous and on the go consumption. And all of that makes it difficult to reduce packaging. And in the end, we want to make low waste goods and goods without single use packaging. For it to really succeed, it has to be the cheapest and most convenient option. Uh, and to do this, then we need to have the required infrastructure, economic incentives, and political framework. Then
Wow.
maybe that's a lot.
Any thoughts?
German companies like LG, they won't give you a plastic bag. You got to bring your own and you got to fill it in. Another company, IKEA, Swedish, also will not give you a plastic bag. You got to bring your own. So at least some companies are trying.
That having been said, it's been really bad with the pandemic because many of the regular grocery stores, all of the regular grocery stores around us, for example, started saying you could not bring your own bags because they couldn't be cleaned. They would not pack them. So you couldn't bring your own bags and you had to use their plastic bags and so on. And then, the incredible number of plastic containers for food, individual servings of food that started to be used by all of the senior residential places and the nursing homes. And now we discovered just recently as we were traveling, the breakfast that the motels and hotels no longer give because they're not allowed to give their regular breakfast. And therefore they load up their breakfast serving places with 1 million individually wrapped cereals and
Yes.
fruit and breads and this, that, and the other thing. So, that has to change. And the other thing that has to change is that people, individual consumers, have to become much more aware of what is happening to the stuff they are throwing away.
Get to the ocean, because we've heard about these, Texas-sized plastic islands in the ocean. How do they get there? Well, what does anybody actually throw them in the air? How does that happen? Anybody know, Richard? Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
How do plastics get into the ocean? That's part of the
We
problem.
throw them away. We put them in our garbage can and they go from the garbage can to the dump if we're lucky. And then the stuff escapes the dump and goes in the rivers. Most of it goes into the ocean by the rivers. And if you look at the plastic pollution problem in the rivers, it's bad in most places around the world. So it gets in the river. The guy throws his, empty Coke bottle away, and it ends up not in the trash pile, but in the river.
So all of it's accidental.
I wonder if there are such things like incinerators for plastic.
The incinerators for plastic they have right now use a lot of energy and they produce waste gases that are toxic. So we can burn it, but then we have to breathe it and put it in our atmosphere, and our atmosphere has other problems.
Can win for losing.
So the way
there is one solution, and that is that we need to replace the pleasure people get from eating different foods from all over the world and eating in groups. We need to replace that pleasure with something else. And one of the things you find is that drug addicts use very little plastic at all because they don't eat. They mainly consume drugs.
now with that, and with an anthropological background, one of the things I know that people have done and our ancestors have done for millions of years is eat together. And
Exactly,
so
and that's
all we have to do is change that, and then we're okay.
correct.
Seems we've got an awful lot of things to do. So let's move on to something that seems to be very easy. How about discovering more viruses?
Now,
What's the viruses doing?
I laughed when you said that and talked about viruses and easy. Right now we're mainly concerned with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it turns out it's just one, and I'm going to give a number base, and if any of you know what this means, I'll give you a gold star. They're just one of the nonillions of viruses on the planet. Who knows how much a nonillion is?
A lot, I imagine.
It's a big number. It's 10 to the 30th. So 10 followed by 30 zeros. And anyway, right now they have found out there are about 10 to the 31, that is 10 nonillions of individual viral particles that inhabit the oceans of this planet, just the oceans, not the landmass. And to give you a scaling of this number, that's 10 billion times the estimated number of stars in the known universe. So that's how many viruses we have in the ocean. And it's becoming clear that ecosystems and organisms rely on the viruses. In fact, without viruses, we wouldn't be alive. And out of all of these viruses, as of last year, we had just named a little over 9,000 species, which is a pitiful fraction of the total. Part of the reason we haven't named many of them is for most of our history we've mainly been interested in a virus if it causes problems for people, like the polio virus. And it also until we got the kind of gene sequencing tools we had, it's very difficult to know what virus is around. They're tiny. You have to have the best kind of magnifying microscopes to be able to see them. And over the last 10 years, the number of known and named viruses has exploded because of the improvements in technology. One of these big improvements is what they call metagenomics, which allows researchers to sample the genomes in an environment without having to culture the individual viruses. And now they can look at single viruses and do the DNA on there. And with the metagenomics, what they would do is they would take a sample of a population, say wastewater coming out of a sewage plant, and then do a genetic analysis on all of these, and then you get a bunch of data, disconnected data, and they have computer programs that would fit it together and then figure out pretty well the different components of it. And so we have better tools to look. Now, as scientists have been looking around in the last few years, these viruses show up even in places they're not looking for them. Like, here was a scientist who didn't intend to study viruses, but he looked at genome sequences from wastewater, and he was hunting for bacteria. And when he got the water samples, besides the bacteria genomes, he found some giant virus genome with more than 1.5 million base pairs. And this turns out to be a giant virus, which is a group that is large both in genome size and absolute size. And these viruses infect amoebae, algae, and other critters like that, making them actually able to influence our ecosystems and environments. Virologists have also looked inside the human body to find new species. Another virologist has analyzed metagenomes from the human gut and built a database containing more than 140,000 kinds of a particular virus called a phage. Those are viruses that attack bacteria. More than half of what he found nobody had ever seen before. And despite their abundance, not much is known about how these viruses contribute to our microbiome. Then the other part of the problem is that now we have been finding so many viruses that we realize our taxonomy, our organization of viruses into their different biological groups and their relationship to each other. We found our virus taxonomy is terrible, and we started with a name. Virologists had grouped viruses based on their shape, but this shape has little to do with their genetic ancestry. For example, there are viruses that have double-stranded DNA, and these viruses now we think have arisen on at least 4 separate occasions. So one of the problems that this points to is they also have been trying to figure out the ancestry of viruses, and they look for one common ancestor, but they can't find one common ancestor. There's no single root for all viruses. It simply does not exist. And the reason for this is these viruses arose several times in the history of life on Earth. And in fact, this virus creation is still ongoing. And so we're starting to make some sense of these viruses, but there's still so much that we don't know. For example, with these oceanic viruses, one of the things we don't know is what is their impact on climate. These oceanic viruses, for example, can then burst out of their microbial host, and when they do that, they release carbon that is either recycled by others as they eat the host's innards, and then produce carbon dioxide, which some of us think has to do with the climate change we're having. But more recently, scientists have found out that these popped cells often clump together and sink to the bottom of the ocean, sequestering the carbon away from our atmosphere. So they think these oceanic bacteria either contribute to CO2 in the atmosphere or reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere by sequestering it, and they don't know what it is. Of course, viruses also influence other organisms by stirring up their genome. They do that because the viruses are basically a protein shell around the DNA. The viruses don't reproduce themselves. They use the genetic mechanisms of other entities like bacteria and like human beings to reproduce. This fact is kind of interesting. It looks like about 8% of human DNA has their origin in viruses. Did you know that you were about 1/16, just a giant virus? And so these we're just starting to be able to identify and find and identify the viruses. What is a much deeper problem and a more difficult problem is figuring out how the viruses influence host life cycles and the ecology. That's much trickier. And one of the things that's tricky about it is first the virus has to figure out which one of these viruses they have to start to analyze. You can see with the coronavirus, they've done a lot in the last year with that virus. And there are so many viruses that figuring out what they all do is just such an enormous problem. At least now, maybe we're making a start.
Any thoughts?
Well, it's certainly a problem for the academics, but it isn't a problem for the rest of us. And the reason is that here we are after 500 years of 500 million years of competitive evolution, and we've evolved the defenses necessary to coexist with all these non-aliens of viruses. So,
except for occasional ones like COVID that kills us.
Well, we're
It
going to die
doesn't kill
anyway.
many of us, though. It doesn't kill many of us.
The thing is, COVID is shortening the lives of people, but they were going to die anyway.
Well,
So
okay.
if we want to move on in evolution, talking not now simply about viruses, but who are our relatives? What's this dragon man fossil? And maybe closer to us than the Neanderthals, and it's from Asia, not Europe. What's that?
So they, in 1930 in China, they discovered a skull that was one of the most complete Homo skulls that they ever found. And now they are saying that that skull represents a newly discovered human species that they call Homo Longi, or Longi, excuse me, Longi, which translates to dragon man. And their findings suggest that this Homo longi lineage may in fact be our closest relative. And if this is the case, this is going to reshape our understanding of human evolution. The cranium was from an adult male. It showed brain size compatible to modern humans, but larger, almost square eye sockets. And, excuse me, and the cranium particularly, they say, presents a mosaic combination of primitive and modern characteristics that is unique. It's different from all of the other previously named Homo species and is closer in terms of the details to Homo sapiens than any other species. This work, they now say, because of this work, they're saying probably Neanderthals arose now maybe 1 million years ago. They had thought 600,000 years ago, and this other Homo then came later. They don't know when. And this particular skeleton is about 150,000 years old. And it was during a time where there was enormous human species migration. And during this time, it looks like there were multiple Homo species around at the same time in Asia, Africa, and Europe, and these were including Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and now the Homo longi. So here there's a new human group that is probably our closest relative. We still don't know much about him yet, but now they view this as a sister species to Homo sapiens. So we have a new guy in the family.
Any thoughts?
It's interesting stuff because, but it's a distraction from the real problems that we face right now, unless we can figure out how this guy got along without internal combustion engines and plastic packaging on his food.
Well, he didn't get along very well because he's extinct.
And there were all these different species of hominids coming along. And the ones that are extinct are the ones that didn't successfully adapt to the ever-present climate change that is part of where we are.
Okay, you got to plug your point.
By the way, there is a 97% consensus about climate change. So, Andrew, I can only conclude that you think there's a massive world conspiracy. I don't understand. I mean, let me say something else. I'm not a climatologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a viral expert. But so I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So I believe experts on taking the vaccine, and not being a climatologist, I accept the 97% consensus that methane and carbon dioxide are the cause. So I mean, do you think there is a conspiracy? I really struggle with this sort of situation.
let's don't go there, okay? Instead of getting into this, let's have this be a place where people can say what they think and not get
Okay, I'm just trying to understand. Okay,
I understand. You know, everybody has their own ideas, is what I understand, and I've tried to figure this out all my life, and I'm no closer to it now than I was when I was 12.
Got it.
So, Richard, if we want to move on to our last topic about the simple blood test that can detect 50 types of cancer, and maybe it's accurate enough to be rolled out. Talk about it.
Now, here we first heard about this about a year ago, and researchers have been working on this for years, because if we could achieve earlier detection for even half of the cancer patients, we would save millions of lives every year. This particular test was pretty much aimed at us, individuals 50 and over, and it's easy and thorough, and it can detect some difficult to detect and diagnose cancers when they're in their early stages, like ovarian cancer and pancreatic cancer, which are commonly killers. And if you detect them early, you can prevent a lot of the deaths. It's based on detecting small leaks of altered DNA that seep out of the tumors. And again, some of the cancers, like pancreatic cancer, were detected with a 63% accuracy even at stage 1. And critically, the most successful rates of detection were found in non-solid tumors, which are tumors for which there are presently no screening methods like liver and pancreatic and esophageal cancers. So also very encouraging was the false positive rate was less than 0.07%. So the positive test is amazingly good. Compare that 0.7% with a 10% false positive from mammography. So that's about 1,000 times more accurate. And not only does it detect the cancer, but in many of the cancers, it is able to detect the location of the body where the cancer was growing, and it was successful at this about 90% of the time. So it not only tells them that, say, you have pancreatic cancer, but it tells them where to look to actually find it. So this will be a very valuable tool in the medical toolkit. And when it's available, I'm going to get one and I'm going to tell all of my friends, go get your cancer test.
Any thoughts?
How expensive?
Don't know.
Regardless,
Where is it available?
regardless, it's a real bonanza for the healthcare industry. We can start building hospitals instead of assisted living complexes.
Hey, that's good. And you're going to get longer return from the hospital because the guys in assisted living all end up dying.
Where is it available?
Nowhere. At your scientific research lab.
I see.
And so what this is this is the report on the first big population testing of the tests. So it's still, I'm sure, going to have to go through more testing and validation before it can be done. They say the final results will be from a study of 140,000 volunteers, and the final results are expected in 2023. So it'll be available for all of us if we live long enough.
That's all we need
I'm just
to
trying
do.
to put off my colonoscopy, so I got to wait 2 more years.
No, but you get almost as good a result from a blood test as you get from the colonoscopy, and the blood test is a lot less of a nuisance, I would say, from experience.
Yeah.
Well,
Agreed.
Richard, thanks a lot for a good session. We may want at some point in time, if there isn't time to discuss things during the session, to see if there are alternate ways of discussing. But anyway, that was great. And thanks to everybody for participating. And once again, we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Adios.
thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good to see you all.
Richard.
Okay.